Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our talks. This is going to be a talk on the power of love and peace and transformation.
And forgiveness.
And forgiveness, that's the biggest point. Thanks for watching our videos. Comment and like, subscribe. If you are getting value out of these videos, let us know. So forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of the key principles in the spiritual path, and it's something that we all have to work on and learn how to work with. And so Persia's going to share some good points and stories about the power of forgiveness.
Well, forgiveness is an ongoing journey, so it happens one step at a time. And, we were really thinking about forgiveness on a personal level in our interpersonal relationships, and forgiveness on a global level, which is, I think, a very, very appropriate topic right now. One of the things that we think about in terms of finding balance with forgiveness is that there's a difference between these two extremes of being tolerant and numbing ourselves and not looking at what's going on in the world, and maybe using the metaphor of sticking the head in the sand. And then on the other extreme, being caught in a storm of emotion, despair, and anger and rage, where we're disconnecting from our own source of divine power, which has practical applications that we're going to talk about. So what's the middle ground? The middle ground is the sage, which we're all working towards slowly and humbly, which is to start to dismantle what's blocking us from entering in a state of peace and clarity. The sage has discernment, but not hatred and judgment. The discernment is based on love and peace. And so we transform the parts of ourselves by doing an inner journey, looking at what we're holding on to and the root cause of what's keeping us from a state of love and peace, where we're constantly repeating a pattern that then we project out into the world in relationships or on our worldview of humanity that can become very jaded, where we lose that sage balance, which is our power. And when we lose that balance and peace, we can't get the divine to work on our behalf, because we're giving our free will to something other than our true nature, and the divine can only serve on our behalf when we're connected to our true nature. And this reminds me of a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh was very big in the teaching of what's called socially engaged Buddhism, and he had an impact on millions of lives because he was a fully enlightened being, and he was able to demonstrate what a person who had freed themselves from contention and ego and protecting your opinion and force, which creates conflict. And what he was teaching was called peaceful reconciliation. And he says, when you come and step up, whether it's personally or in the world, for the practice of reconciliation, if peace is missing, there can be no reconciliation. That's confirming what I just talked about the power of our true nature, which is our connection to our divine clarity, our connection to the love and peace within us, which actually is the greatest form of activism and transformation that the planet could ever experience, or that our personal relationships that haven't been harmonious could ever experience. And we have to be very gentle and kind with ourselves, very compassionate with ourselves, because this journey takes time, and it requires us to go within.
I think this talk came about because we heard someone recently talking about the anger and not repressing your anger, and they were talking about all the things they were angry about, and it's true, they were talking about you get ill if you repress your anger, and they were talking about the importance of expressing anger. But what we realized in the talk is that you have to move beyond expressing the anger. So you don't repress it, you get in touch with it. But then you also don't just get angry and blast out anger everywhere. You have to go find the source of the anger and you have to transform it into peace
And
your
healing.
and your personal power. So that's why we wanted to talk about how do you transform these things.
And in that talk, there was also some comment made about how repression of anger scientifically leads to illness. But expression and repression of anger have the same impact. They both lead to illness. Meta-scientific studies show that forgiveness leads to physical healing of the body, not expression of anger, because there's an unfinished business, So yes, being unconscious and repressing something means you don't have access to even do the healing work if you're not even acknowledging it. But through practices that are scientific, like meditation gets you in touch with the inner witness that can be impartial, that can look at the internal landscape and knows how to turn that energy back into our true nature and our forgiveness, which frees us and disentangles us, so we're not getting completely obliterated energetically and mentally by the entanglement of holding on to that anger, because expressing it is still holding on to it. So Grace and I have worked with the Paco Andino lineage of Peru for many, many years. And this is a mystical lineage of light, and they have a map of how to return to our inner light and know our true nature as light. And they have a teaching about the conquistadors, which came to Peru over 500 years ago, and the suffering that their communities experienced. They experienced imprisonment, torture, death, marginalization and discrimination, and displacement from their homelands. And they give a teaching that they shared with us, that these elders of the way of light, they share that if you hold on to anger for anyone, but they use this teaching about the conquistadors, the mindset of the conquistadors has impacted the local communities today, where people whose root ancestors came from that community discriminate against their own indigenous people. So it's a very painful thing. And the elders, they don't cry because they feel disempowered by that discrimination. They cry because they feel grief for those who have lost their way. So they don't have a victim consciousness. And the reason they don't have a defense and an imprisonment is because they know they didn't need meta studies from science. They have the clarity because of the path of light to witness and be sincere to see that illness and devastation happens to an individual who doesn't forgive. They say that we are cursed because of that disempowerment from our true nature when we don't forgive. Forgiveness is not an easy journey. It needs a lot of support, and a lot of wonderful scientific tools can support that, and we just move to it slowly and gradually. But we want to talk about the power of the result of forgiveness. So the Paco Andino lineage teaches their children that not forgiving and holding on to anger will destroy you. And they want their children to be free from an inner enemy, from an inner lawsuit, so that they can be their fullest expression of light, because we're here to know ourselves as love. And I thought that elder lineage and ancient teaching is so exquisite and beautiful. So I wanted to share their perspective as well as a few others in addition to Thich Nhat Hanh. I wanted to talk about the application and the power that happens through this exquisite story. And we've seen many, many stories of the power of forgiveness and transforming ourselves into peace. But this is a story about that was shared on NPR, and I think it was over 10 years ago. It's about a black blues musician, and I wanted to look up his name because I remembered the story. His name is Daryl Davis. And NPR reported on his miraculous story because he convinced 200 KKK members to give up their robes. This is a profound application and practical result of a man who held a stance of peace and humanity towards everyone. And he entered into a dialogue and developed connection. And he developed a dialogue about shared humanity, love, and understanding.
I think maybe convince is the wrong word. I think through the connection that he made, the human connection and the relationships, that people just voluntarily decided, I don't want to hate people anymore, because they realized that the connection and the love was what was real.
But holding on to that much love for the person that you're in dialogue with, that's what Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about. That's peaceful reconciliation. When you don't hate the person that you're talking to, but you wholly and truly hold a stance of love, this allows the divine to work on our behalf. And that is the expression of something that we might consider a miracle or an impossible task. It's not impossible, because when you hold that stance, your power is amplified, and the divine will serve humanity's will when our ego is not the one in charge. So this is an important scientific observation that we want to show, because it's a very practical teaching.
And it is about removing the ego, because our egos want to hold on to that anger because they feel justified in the way that
Holding
maybe
an enemy.
that we've been hurt, or we feel justified in our need for justice. And so the ego likes to hold on to the anger. It likes to hold on to feeling maybe self-righteous, or
It feels very safe and comfortable to do that. It's very uncomfortable.
So it's
to let
that's
that
why
go.
it's so difficult to give up the anger and actually find true forgiveness and acceptance.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because when we start noticing how much we rely on that comfort of protecting ourselves through resenting another being, and then we see how much it's completely devastating our own light, we become very motivated to get help to step beyond that. But this actually transforms the world. It transforms our family relationships, our closest, dearest, intimate relationships, our friendships, our community, and our broader world. So it's an incredibly powerful teaching.
I think it's easy for anyone, if you observe when you hang around people, and people that you're around are very angry and constantly saying very angry things, or expressing a lot of anger and frustration, it's kind of a downer, and you learn to just kind of maybe avoid that type of person. So, it's definitely does you as an individual good to avoid angry people, but if you also are holding on to anger, you don't want to be the person that everyone's avoiding. By holding that inner peace and by holding that acceptance and love, you become a receptive person to relationships and sincere, authentic connection. And that's, as a human being, that's what we're all here to have.
And you become empowered because you start to know your own true nature. And that guides your whole entire life. And you get the health benefits of no longer holding a contention with another person.
You don't get sick anymore.
I can speak on that personally. The number of doorways that have opened to healing by accepting what other people are choosing and finding my own freedom is profound. All of us have had to work on forgiveness at one point or another in our lifetime.
Yeah, we call it not being entangled anymore with that negative energy.
Yeah. The last story I wanted to share was shared by the monastics from Self-Realization Fellowship, which are the monastics that are from the lineage of Paramahansa Yogananda. And we listened to their talks. They're quite exquisite. You can find them on YouTube, and I highly recommend their inspiring weekly talks. But Paramahansa Yogananda's root guru, in the story that the monks shared in one of their talks, is Mahavatar Babaji. And Mahavatar Babaji has helped many, many beings become fully God-realized or enlightened, in other terms. And Mahavatar Babaji is in the celestial realm called, in Hinduism, it's called Vaikuntha. And him and Jesus work together. on behalf of humanity. And this is another story of the application and power of radical change that is created. And this is the only successful way change happens. When humanity is holding the right energy. And they explained through what Yogananda taught them in his conversations with Christ and Babaji, is that during World War II, which is when Yogananda was alive, he was in the United States from 1920 to I think 1953 was his death. So he lived through the whole World War II saga with Hitler. And Babaji and Christ, solely because of the karma of India and the United States being in right alignment in terms of the energy that we were holding, not being a hate energy, but an energy of love, Babaji and Christ were allowed to put thoughts in the mind, because we're not allowed to interfere with free will of humanity. No divine being is allowed to interfere with the free will of humanity, which is why it's so radically important that forgiveness and peace be something that we work towards transforming in ourselves. So Babaji and Christ were able, because of the free will given by humanity's proper alignment, they were able to put thoughts into the mind of Hitler that caused him to make wrong moves during the end of World War II that ultimately resulted in him losing the war. I love that story. Again, that's just an example of how practical this is, how powerful this is. And that's why we felt very inspired to help people understand. There's a lot of talks about forgiveness, but to see the results of forgiveness and to know how deeply powerful forgiveness is and what it leads to, I think is a good inspiration for us to go within and transform and find that peace.
So find forgiveness for everyone in your life, find forgiveness for the collective, and empower yourself to be a peaceful, loving person who actually is an agent of change on behalf of the divine. So thank you.
Lots of love.
Lots of love. Bye-bye.
See you guys soon.